So my guest today is Aileen Carson, a career coach based in Scotland. My first guest from Scotland. She's had a varied career, starting as an editor in the publishing industry and then moved into the housing sector, working specifically with people with mental health problems, learning disabilities, and dementia. God bless you. Her passion for working with people led her to train to become a coach, and she set up a coaching business that specializes in helping others transition to new careers. She focuses on helping people identify what kind of job they want and looks at what holds them back so she can help them overcome any barriers or obstacles that they put in their way or that others have put in their way, so they can get to where they want to. Her own career transitions have given her a unique understanding of the difficulties people face when moving into a new area. Aileen, welcome! Thanks for making time today.
Thank you very much for having me, Jeff.
So just from that intro, we know you've made at least one career change, maybe even a little bit of fear that surfaced during that time, right?
Yes, I think whenever we move from something that's very familiar to something that's very unfamiliar, then there can be a lot of fear involved. For me, it wasn't a difficult decision to leave my job in my previous career. I'd got as far as I wanted to, and at the time I was working in a role that, well, it was a job that the organisation had a bit of a toxic culture, and it wasn't a great environment to work in. So that was the easy part. But trying to figure out what I was going to do next was the hard part. And there was obviously a bit of doubt as well about, is it the right thing to do? Why do I want to leave one role and go into something very different? So yeah, I think fear is a very natural thing when you're doing something like that.
And I think most people know what they want to get away from.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
I know when I coach people, the first thing I try and work with them on is it that you really hate the environment that you're in, or do you hate the work? If it's hate the work, then we have to work on what's the next step. Is that how you work with people?
Yes, very much so. I think once people have worked out why they want to leave, and I suppose the first step really, as you say, is working out that they do actually want to leave. If it's the organisation they don't like, but they like the work, they could find a role in a similar sort of field, but in a different organisation. But I think definitely that you sort of start from making that decision that you want to go, and then trying to figure out what you want to do next.
Wonderful. So obviously there are a lot of things to take into consideration when making a career change. Ball's in your court. Where should we start? What sort of things do people have to think about in making a change?
I think there are some practical things like looking at what you're good at and what you enjoy doing. And that sounds quite a sort of simplistic way of looking at it, but sometimes I think that we can often get a bit ground down with our work. It can take over our lives, that sometimes people don't always stop to think about what they really enjoy doing and what they're good at. So I would sort of start from there. But I think it's also important to look at your values. What is it that guides you within your life? So look at your own values, perhaps even just make a list of them, and then look at any potential organisations that you're thinking you might like to work for. Do their values align with your own? If not, then it's best to stay away from them. If they do, that might be a potential employer.
I'm going to interrupt you right there because you've hit on 3 points right off the bat. So the first thing was about liking and passionate about what you do.
Yes.
And some people are so caught up in the mundane and the tedium. As an old blues singer sang, the thrill is gone for that reason, because they've been caught up in that. Maybe they like doing the staff level role, but they don't like the manager job. And it's an issue of what the difference is for them between the two. Is that what you tend to see as well?
Sometimes, yes. Although quite often I find that for some people who have started off in a particular sector or job, they really like the work, but quite often there can be specific things that perhaps they're just finding absolutely exhausting. Like You know, it could be perhaps they are having issues within the team that they're managing. They might be a very difficult team to manage. There could be individuals in the organisation who are very difficult to work with. So it's possibly trying to find a way around some of these things as well.
Yeah, well, it's what I describe as being institutional friction.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, it's, you know, instead of having that nice, smooth runway for the ball to roll down, there are lots of bumps along the way
Yes,
that take the pleasure out of the work.
Yes, yeah. And these kind of things can lead towards burnout as well. And I don't know if you see a lot of this in your work, Jeff, but I certainly see quite a lot in mine that, especially the last 18 months with the pandemic as well, you know, people are exhausted, they're burnt out. And that can kind of confuse the issue a little bit, because people don't always know whether actually is a career change what I want. Is that going to help alleviate the sort of symptoms of burnout? Or do I need to find a way of managing stress better and perhaps staying in my current role for the time being until I've had a chance to give myself a bit of space and to think about what I would want to move on to?
And do you find that the suggestion of maybe taking a course that relates to the new idea that they have works for many people? I know we're kind of bouncing around here off the original conversation, but I'm curious about the notion of taking a course as either exploration or helping them develop some life to themselves again, instead of feeling the burnout.
Yes, sometimes. Again, I think it depends on what people are thinking about doing. But yes, certainly a course or any kind of training, if you've got an idea of what you might want to move to, then that can be really useful. And it can sometimes help people make the decision as well. If they decide that it's not actually what they're interested in, then they might start thinking about moving into a different area.
Excellent. I apologize for the interruptions and the digressions.
Not at all.
So what sort of other things should people take into consideration when they're considering the new role? If we need to go backward a little bit, by all means, let's do it, because I stopped at the first point you made, and there were two that followed right after it. So if you have notes, let's go back to those two, okay?
Okay. I think looking at, as well as looking at what you might enjoy doing, look at your skills, because if you're moving into an area where you don't have much experience, it's going to be really important to highlight any transferable skills and to also demonstrate to potential employers that, that you have these skills and that they will be useful into the area that you're moving into. So you might want to look at some examples of what you've achieved in previous roles, you know, using these skills. I mean, it could be anything. It could be how you've made the company money, how you've saved them money, you know, have you delivered some sort of high profile projects very successfully, and what it took, what skills it took to actually do each of these things. So I think that's really important, particularly when you're looking at moving into areas where you don't have a lot of experience, because there are still a lot of employers who value experience highly, and there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of jobs you will need experience, but there are also jobs where you don't necessarily need to have, you know, 5-10 years worth of experience. If you can demonstrate that you've picked up very useful transferable skills from elsewhere and you can bring them into a new workplace, then, you know, that can work just as well.
So since we may not necessarily know what's transferable until we identify the new field, I think it might be helpful for them to just identify what the skills and experiences are, almost as an enormous list. It is a way of compiling that. So as you start to narrow down to fields, you might be able to have that list as a reference point for what's transferable.
Yes, very much so. And that can be quite a difficult thing for some people to do. It's not always easy identifying your own skills. Some people are very good at it, others less so. One thing I sometimes advise clients to do is that if they're having problems identifying their own skills, to ask a friend what they think they're good at, or perhaps a trusted colleague, a family member, anybody that you trust. Because very often people can pick up things or see things within you that we don't always see ourselves. So for anyone who's having problems actually making a list of their own skills, then asking somebody else can be quite effective.
Yes, and your wife, husband, and partner obviously have certain capabilities to evaluate and assess, but go past them. Go to the people you've worked with in the past, the people you work with now, and what they see in you. Don't just settle for one or two. Get to lots of folks, because everyone sees you a little bit different.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think just getting other people's perspective as well can be really useful. Yeah.
So what else should people do as they're starting to put this all together?
I think it kind of relates to identifying your skills, but show how you can add value to a prospective employer. So what can you bring with you? So some of that will be experience, if you have relevant experience. Some of that will be skills, but in what way can you add value to an organization? I think that's really important, and it's something that employers will look for, particularly if you don't have a lot of experience.
Yes, and you reminded me that you used the term values rather than value. So I want to come back to values for a second and ask about how someone identifies their values, and what sorts of values have tended to surface with the people that you've coached.
I think for identifying your own values, it's about looking at the way that you live your life. What things are important to you, or what things guide you through your life. So, and it will be different for everybody. For some people, it might be honesty, integrity. These two I find come up a lot with people I'm working with. But there could be all sorts of values. And I think that if you're living your life according to your own values, then that's definitely a first step. But then if you're working with an organization or a company that shares those values, then I think that can give you more meaning in your work. It can make it seem more fulfilling. And it's definitely one way of reducing the risk of burnout.
Interesting. And that, folks, that's going to take a little bit of time on your part to reflect. Again, don't just think you're going to sit down for an hour with your laptop or iPad and you're going to knock all this stuff out and expect to be perfect the first time. It really requires some self-reflection.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. If you are thinking about making a career change, then it's not something that's going to happen overnight. You do need, as you say, you do need to spend some time thinking about it. You need to make sure you've given yourself some space and some time. So if you're spending your life running around, constantly checking your emails, just never taking a minute to yourself, you're not going to have that clarity of thought. And it can be really difficult to do. We're all busy, but you need to be able to give yourself some peace and quiet, some time, maybe over a couple of weeks, and just spending some time thinking about your own values and what you want your life to be like, not just your working life, but how you want that to fit in with your overall life.
And for those of you who have the interest in being digital nomads, for example, if that's the quality of life that you want, then how do you put together your work life in a way that supports that? So lots of things to consider, and we're just putting out ideas for you so that you can do the work, or you can work with one of us to sort these things out so that the risk of mistake is lessened. So what other sorts of things should people consider when they're looking at a career change?
I think the things that we've mentioned so far, I think, are a good starting point. But just going back to the point I was making earlier about being realistic about all of this, you may have some ideas of what kind of work you want to do, but you also need to make sure that it's something that you can earn a living from. We all have to make a living, so is check that there is some kind of reality here, some kind of business reality, that you can actually earn a decent income, from what it is that you think you want to do. So looking at your skills, your experience, your values I think is a really good starting point. But at some point you do have to then think, okay, how realistic is this? Can I actually do this? Can I achieve this? And it might be that you reach out to your network, perhaps, if you're kind of fairly well connected. If you know people who are working in a field that's similar to what you're thinking about doing, reach out to them and see if they can offer some advice. people are often very willing to help. And if you ask them for advice, quite often they're happy to do that, particularly if you're very enthusiastic about moving into their specific line of work.
So in the US, we refer to these as informational interviews or informational conversations, where you speak with someone who's doing the work to understand what it's really like, what the expectations are, and what the income potential might be. Is that what you were speaking of there?
Yes, I think that sounds very much like it. Yeah, I just think that you have to be very realistic about what you're going to do. We might all have grand ideas and we might achieve those. I'm not saying you can't, but you do have to be realistic and actually think, okay, can I make a living out of what it is I want to do?
And one of my favorite things is the person who's making six figures who says, I won't take a cent less than what I'm earning now to become a complete new person in a new field. Obviously, they're setting themselves up for failure.
Absolutely, yes.
So the realistic stuff sounds basically like evaluating and assessing a host of different things so that you have, let's say, a big, wide landscape to explore, getting a sense of who you are, what your values are, and the value you might bring to the next organization. How am I doing so far?
That sounds great.
Good. And then from there, starting to begin the exploration process of what the new field might be for real, as opposed to the fantasy idea that you have. When do you suggest that people start to have the conversation with their family about the possibility of making a change? Because obviously they have to be on board or else it's going to be torture.
Yes, yeah. I think you need to do some initial work first. So, the things that we've just discussed. So I think the starting points that we've mentioned, I think it's quite important to at least have an idea in your mind about what you want to do and possibly an idea of how you're going to do it. But yes, you're right. It is very important to have the people closest to you, such as partners, families, to have them on board, because this could be a very big change for them as well, depending on what you're going to go into. I mean, if you move into a new field and you're actually taking a pay cut, then that could have an impact on your family as well. So it is important to get them on board and to explain clearly what you're doing and why you're doing it. And I think it's also important to talk about how you feel about it. If you're in a job that you can't stand and it's just it's sort of wearing you down, but you've got an idea of what you want to move on to, and you think that that's going to, make such a difference to your life and also have an positive impact on your family's lives, then I think it's important to explain all that to people as well, to get them on board. But it might be difficult for other people to understand if you are moving into an area that's very, very different from what you've done for years. People don't always understand that to begin with. And I think you have to be prepared that you may get some negative reactions. I'm not saying that will happen. Sometimes people will be very positive, very supportive. I certainly found that with my career changes, that the majority of people I spoke to were very supportive. But there were one or two who didn't really understand why I was moving into a completely different area, and thought I'd lost my mind. So you might have to explain that to people, that there's a reason why you've chosen to do this. And it would be really helpful for you if they were on board with that to support you.
It's so true. And I know from my own experience, I met my wife in graduate school when I was 51 and she was 41. And when we decided to get married, we were going to do the house, the child, the traditional sorts of things. And I had a very lucrative career as a headhunter at that time. And I was considering a move to become a therapist in private practice. And I realized that there would be a number of years of build up for that, where at best I wouldn't be anywhere near my previous income. So I put everything on hold for a lengthy period of time and continued, even though I knew I was pretty tired of work, and pushed as long as I could until I got to my 60s and our son about to graduate high school, and said to my wife, I've got one more year. So I'm giving you notice about this. I've got one more year before I transition to something different. And she was surprised when it ultimately came to the end of that year that I actually would do it. But folks, I'm just sharing that little episode with you because, there are other people involved and your earnings may change significantly and they need to be on board. Otherwise, your house will not be a pleasant place for quite some time. What happened with you in your transitions? Was everyone on board, or is there just a you on board?
No, most people were. I think because I was moving from a career in publishing and I was then going to work with people with long-term severe mental health problems, it was so different from what I'd been doing for sort of 10, 15 years that there was a lot of surprise. But when I explained to people why I wanted to do this, and I thought that the work was going to be much more rewarding and that would have quite a big effect on my overall life and well-being, then most people understood. My husband was very supportive. He knew how unhappy I'd been in my very last publishing job, so he wasn't at all surprised that I wanted to leave and was completely on board with that decision. A little bit surprised, I think, about the area that I wanted to go into, but what I found really helped me, as well as having some very supportive friends and a very supportive husband, was that I've been doing some voluntary work for about a year before I moved into mental health, on a mental health helpline, which I absolutely loved. And that really helped me clarify my thoughts about the move that I was about to make. And when I explained that to sort of family and friends, that I'd got a little bit of experience in that area, and they could see how much I enjoyed the voluntary work. So when I decided to try and make this a full-time career, there was a better understanding, I think, of why I was doing this and the impact that that was going to have on me and my life. And I was just going to be an awful lot happier doing a job that felt much more worthwhile. I mean, it paid less. I was not going to be in a less senior position to start with. But because I had previous management experience as well, it didn't take long to work my way back up again. And it was much quicker second time round than it was the first time, because I had a lot of relevant experience, even though it was in a different sector. So I think if you explain to people what you're doing and why you're doing it, then hopefully most people will be on board with it. And I was very lucky, most people were, but there were one or two people who just could not, they just didn't get it. And I think no matter how I explained it, they just didn't really understand it. But they did come round once I started in my new career, really enjoyed it. For the first time in my life, I actually looked forward to going to work, and I didn't even think that was possible. So it definitely is possible. But when they could see that, they understood why I had done what I'd done and were much more supportive of it at that point.
Did you run into any sorts of surprises during the transition period from your old career to the new one?
I think the main thing is just how much I enjoyed working, because although I'd enjoyed some of my previous jobs, I didn't have that same passion and enthusiasm that I had when I moved into working with people with mental health problems. So that passion and enthusiasm had presumably always been there, but it was much more prominent, once I actually changed career. So I think that the level of enthusiasm I felt was a surprise. I was hopeful that I would enjoy the job and that I would be enthusiastic about it, but that was much, much stronger than I thought. I think as well, I'd met a completely different set of people. So, I'm still in contact with some of the people I worked with in my publishing days. They've become very good friends. But the people who I worked with when I sort of made that career change had just very different ideas about life, about work. I'm not saying one's better than the other, but it was just, I met a completely different group of people. And that really kind of expanded my outlook on life. It really completely expanded my horizons. So that was something that was unexpected. I didn't really think that it would have that kind of effect on my life, but that was great, really great experience. And I kind of carried that with me, even though I've made a sort of slightly more minor change since then. I sort of carried that with me. And when I moved into coaching, again, I met, people I would never have come into contact with otherwise. Kind of made some good friends, some really good connections. So yeah, I think that the people aspect of it was the one part that I didn't expect. I knew the work would be very different and there might be some surprises there, but just the number of people I met, and just people with very different views and outlooks and different perspectives, has been really good in helping me develop. Actually, just I think just when you speak to people with very different perspectives to your own, that can really help expand your outlook.
I know for me, one challenge I ran into was that I was very heavily branded toward job search because I was a headhunter, and I was aggressive in promoting myself during those years. You know, I had an e-zine. For those of you who are not familiar with the term, newsletter that I had published for many years. I was on YouTube. I had a podcast about job search. The association with me in headhunting was extremely strong. So when I made the transition into coaching, I expected to do a break between one and the other. And the people I knew basically told me it's not quite that time yet. So it's been gradual that I've been moving to expand beyond simply job search. I've got world-class expertise in that area. I understand why people come to me, but it's also about hiring more effectively, managing and leading, workplace-related issues. And I bring all my training, which includes my MSW, it includes the postgraduate psychoanalytic training I've done, my experience running groups of a variety of sort, that I'm able to bring into these different playpens and now do work that isn't just around job search, but it's around the areas that I enjoy even more. I have to say even more because it's not that I dislike the others, but you know, it's fun for me, and it helps me grow as well as I work with people and firms in different ways. So we've already covered a lot. What haven't we spoken about yet that we really should?
I think there's one thing that occurs to me is that sometimes people think that age can be a barrier, and I think actually, Jeff, I think you've just demonstrated from your own story that it's absolutely not. But you know, I think a lot of people think that you get to a certain age, you can't make any changes to your career. You've been doing the same thing for 20, 30, 40 years. So, you can't move into a new area. But I would sort of say to that it doesn't matter how old you are. I mean, I was only in my 30s when I made my first sort of main career change. But then I made another sort of slight change in my early 40s. I'm now almost 50 and I've set up my own business, and again, in a different area. So, you don't have to be in your 20s or your 30s to be able to do these things. It's about all the things that we've talked about, looking at where your passions lie, what are you good at, and what can you do, in the future, and persuading employers if you're going to be looking for employed work or whether you're going to set up your own business. So I would say to anybody who thinks that they can't do something because they're too old, that's nonsense, that age does not have to be a barrier at all. It's only a barrier if you let it be a barrier.
It's what I refer to the lies we tell ourselves.
Absolutely, yes.
There's ample data to tell us that it's not true that age is a barrier. There's a wonderful story, and again, I'm not sure if this will be something that is a reference point for you, but in the United States, there's a fast food chain called KFC, which stands for Kentucky Fried Chicken. And the man who started it was in his 60s, I believe. At the time, he realized, I've got to do something else. I'm not really making much money. And even he was trying to figure out what to do. And he knew he had this one recipe for fried chicken that people liked. And he offered to give it away and take a percentage of sales, and no one wanted it. And so he eventually started doing it out of a gas station. And from that comes a chain with thousands of fast food restaurants all over the world that was sold years ago to another firm. I want to say it's Pepsi, but I could be wrong. And he started in his 60s, as I recall. It's just a question of, is this something that you care about? Do you have that drive to do it? Or do you want to just make excuses for why it's not possible? Don't opt for the excuses. because then you have to live with the disappointment and the sadness and the longing of living that life of desperation that says, I missed my chance. There's no reason to miss your chance, folks. Aileen, this has been wonderful. How can people find out more about you and the work that you do?
They can either connect with me on LinkedIn or they can look at my website, which is aileencarson.com.
Could you spell Aileen for everyone? Spell the website.
Of course. So AILEENCARSON.com.
Thank you. I appreciate you making time today. And folks, we'll be back soon with more. I'm Jeff Altman, the Big Game Hunter. If you're interested in one-on-one coaching, more information, a whole bunch of stuff, visit my website, thebiggamehunter.us. In the blog, there's tons of information. You can schedule time for a free discovery call, schedule time for coaching, purchase one of my courses. There's just a lot there to help you. In addition, connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/IN/the Big Game Hunter. Mention that you saw the interview. I like knowing I'm helping a few folks, you know, and once we're connected on LinkedIn, I know your network is going to grow by a lot. Hope you have a terrific day, and most importantly, be great. Take care.